Okay, hi everyone. Thanks so much for joining us for our next webinar for the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni in Higher Ed. I'd like to ask that everyone keep their videos and microphones off and sound off. I also want to let everyone know that this webinar will be recorded and made available on the NRC FAHE website. Again, welcome to the National Research Collaborative for Foster Alumni in Higher Ed's webinar series. My name is Amy Salazar. I'm an assistant professor at Washington State University in Vancouver. Before I get into today's webinar, I want to let you know about our next scheduled webinar. So our 7th webinar will be held on Wednesday, September 18th. From 1 to 2 Pacific time, which is 4 to 5 Eastern time. And the presenter will be Jennifer Blakesley, Research Assistant Professor, and Becky Miller, Research Assistant, both at Portland State University School of Social Work. And their presentation entitled Project Futures, Findings from a Near-Peer Coaching Intervention for College Students with Foster Care Backgrounds and Mental Health Challenges. We'll describe the Futures model, present preliminary analysis of intervention impact on student outcomes related to self-determination, self-efficacy, and mental health and academic success. And they'll also share findings from a qualitative sub-study exploring student perspectives of their mental health experiences and foster care backgrounds in the college context. So please be sure to register for that webinar. You can do that through the emails that you get from the group. You can also go to the website or email me if you're having trouble finding that link. Okay, so for today's webinar, we will have Debbie Rauscher presenting today, and she'll have about 35-40 minutes for her presentation, and then we'll reserve some time at the end for Q&A. And so for the Q&A time, we have I'd like to ask you to hold your questions till the end, and then when it is time for Q&A, I'll have you type your questions into the chat box, and I'll read them out for our presenter to respond to. And if you're joining us by phone, please, you can also email me your questions. My email is amy.salazar, S-A-L-A-Z-A-R, at wsu.edu, and I'll keep an eye on those and read those as well. Okay, so today our presenter is Debbie Rauscher. She is the project director for the John Burton Advocates for Youth in California, and in this role she oversees the agency's technical assistance and training designed to improve post-secondary educational outcomes for foster youth. And she implements a statewide advocacy agenda crafted to address the needs of foster youth attending college. And her presentation is entitled From Research to Policy, Lessons Learned from California. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to you, Debbie. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Let's see. I'm hoping you can see my PowerPoint.
I can see it.
Okay. Just give me 1 second. Are you seeing the slide mode now?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So hello, everybody. As Amy said, my name is Debbie Rauscher, and I am with John Burton Advocates for Youth. So just a couple of words before I jump into the content about my organization. We are an advocacy organization based in California, focusing on addressing the needs of transition age foster youth and homeless youth. We do this across 3 different issue areas: education, housing, and health. I am our director of education. And the education component of the work we do is referred to as our project called California College Pathways. and we operate a textbook fund. We also provide technical assistance and training to both college campuses and other stakeholders, and then do a lot of advocacy and policy work, which is a lot of what I'm talking about today. So my presentation today is going to have three parts, starting with some background information about what the research here in California specifically tells us about foster youth's educational trajectory, some information about the data and research efforts taking place in California, and then some information about what we've been doing on the policy level and how the data work that we've done intersects with the policy efforts in California. So I always like to start with this slide, which is from Georgetown University, about why education matters. And it really gives a very stark picture about how the economy has changed in the last 10 years. And you can see from the chart on the screen that for somebody with only a high school diploma or less, which is that green line down at the bottom, during the last recession, our economy lost 5.6 million jobs, and those jobs never came back. And so there are fewer and fewer opportunities for somebody without some form of post-secondary training. In contrast, the blue line at the top shows job growth during the recovery after the recession, gaining 8.4 million jobs that require a bachelor's degree or higher. And then for those with an associate degree or some college, there was some job loss during the recession, but those individuals were able to weather that much better than those with only a high school diploma. And then there has been an uptick in the number of jobs available for those folks as well. Unfortunately, despite the fact that higher education is more important than ever for everybody, including foster youth, the data that is coming out of California has shown that foster youth really face a number of challenges to academic success. So about 1/3 of students in foster care change schools at least once during the school year, which is 4 times the rate of other students. Foster youth are much more likely to have a disability, which then creates some additional challenges as they transition into higher education. 1 in 4 foster youth in California are chronically absent, compared to just 1 in 10 for the general student population. This is some data that's just come out in the last couple of years and is really quite alarming. And over half of California's foster youth attend poor quality high schools, compared to 1/3 of the general student population. So we know that there's a lot of challenges that foster youth are facing as they move through their educational career. Not surprisingly, what the research has found here in California is that this does lead to some serious academic delays. So this chart shows based on academic proficiency tests here in California, comparing foster youth to the general population as well as to students who are economically disadvantaged. And you can see that 50% of foster youth on the English language arts tests tested either far below basic or below basic. So that's double the number of the general population. And I think interestingly, it's significantly higher as well than students who are facing economic disadvantage. So we can really see that the foster youth population is quite unique and has needs that are distinct even from other subgroups of students who might be identified as having additional needs. And this chart is for the English test, but we see the same results in math as well. Some other data points that I just wanted to share from something called the Cal Youth Study. This is a study that's been going on here in California for the last few years that has been conducted by the University of Chicago Chapin Hall. And what they are doing is taking a look at California's extended foster care program. So we did opt in to extend foster care to age 21. And they have been doing a study looking at youth who participated in extended foster care, as well as youth who chose to opt out of extended foster care, and trying to really evaluate the impact that extending foster care to age 21 has had. And there's good news and there's bad news. At age 19, they found that only 24% of foster youth were enrolled in a 2-year or 4-year college, compared to 57% of their same age peers. So that's not great to see that they're not enrolling in college at the same rates as others. However, when they did look at this same population by age 21, they found that 80% had a high school diploma or equivalent, and 42.4% have had completed at least 1 year of college. So what they really found is that foster youth are in fact graduating from high school and going to college. They're just doing so sometimes later than their peers who are not in foster care. And so we here in California have a data system that shows graduation rates for a variety of subpopulations, one of which is foster youth. And there's actually a statistic from that that's often cited that only half of foster youth graduate from college. And it turns out that that's not really the whole picture, because that data is looking at how many foster youth graduated within 4 years of entering the 9th grade. And in that case, it is 50%, and it's substantially lower than non-foster youth. But when we actually look by age 21, whether they have graduated or have a GED, we see the numbers jump up considerably. And so that's the good news, is that actually the data is not quite as bad as it might first appear. And that in terms of college enrollment, even though only 24% were enrolled by age 19, by age 21, that's gone up to 42.4%. The data also found that those who did enroll were significantly less likely to enroll in a four-year university than their peers. Here in California, about 85% of foster youth who enroll in college do so at one of our community colleges. But another piece of good news to share is that the research is finding that participation in extended foster care increases the probability that youth will both complete a high school credential and enroll in college. So we are finding that some of the interventions that we're using, in particular the extension of foster care to 21, is having a real tangible impact on the trajectory of young people's educational journey. We are finding, however, going back to some bad news again, that once at college, foster youth are not being successful. So really what the CalYouth study in particular is pointing to is that we here in California we're doing a better job getting foster youth through high school and into college, not so much yet getting them through college and being successful. We did a study a few years back where we were able to look at foster youth and identify whether they were receiving financial aid. One of the sort of more startling things that we found was that 85% were receiving what was known as the Board of Governors fee waiver at our community colleges, and just 50% of those same students were receiving a Pell Grant. And the big difference between the fee waiver and the Pell Grant was completing the FAFSA. You don't have to complete a FAFSA to get the fee waiver. It's a very easy process to get the fee waiver. The income eligibility for those two programs is largely the same. And so it wasn't that the students were qualifying for one and not the other. It was really that they weren't managing to get through the financial aid process of completing the FAFSA, completing it correctly, doing all their verification. So this one piece of data really informed a lot of our policy efforts, and I'm going to talk more and later in the presentation about exactly sort of how we then approached this challenge that we found in the research work that we've done. We also know that foster youth are succeeding in courses at lower rates than their counterparts. So this is comparing the course completion rates for foster youth and non-foster youth, looking both at credit-bearing courses as well as non-credit basic skills courses. You can see foster youth there are the orange bar and non-foster youth are the gray bar. And you can see that there's really significant differences in whether foster youth are successfully completing their courses once they arrive at college. We don't actually have data yet on completion, degree completion, but I think we can infer from this data that if they're not successfully passing their classes, that they're probably not completing college at rates that are equivalent to non-foster youth. So you may be wondering sort of how we've approached being able to get access to this kind of data, and I'm going to now transition to talking about what we've done over the last really 6 or 7 years or so around data collection and trying to get access to better data about foster youth's college experience. So the work that we've done really kind of hinges on a system called CalPass Plus. CalPass Plus is a data system that's operated by a private nonprofit called Educational Results Partnership, but they are contracted to do this work by our community college system. And what this does is it's an aggregated shared measurement system. So it only provides aggregate data. There's no personally identifiable information. There's no student level data in the system. So it's not a system that a campus could use to track a particular individual and what was going on with them. But it is a system that is designed to be able to pull from a variety of different places. So from K-12 systems, from community colleges, from universities, and from the labor market in order to really kind of track longitudinally in the aggregate what's happening with students. And then within this, we've created something, or they've created something called the Foster Youth Data Dashboard, which has allowed us to look at a whole range of metrics specifically for foster youth. So what are some of the types of metrics that the dashboard allows us to look at? Remediation needs, financial aid access, enrollment, campus support participation, GPA and course completion retention, whether students are participating in career and technical education programs, and completion numbers. And actually the educational results is in the process of revamping the whole dashboard. It's going to look really different in a couple of months. And they're adding to it a whole bunch of data related to post-college employment outcomes. So they have access to all of the information from the Employment Development Department, and so they can look at the students who have exited a community college, whether because they graduated or just because they quit, and see what their wages look like, compare wages across different populations, compare their wages to what they were before they entered college. So there's some really exciting data that we're going to have access to moving forward. That looks even beyond the college experience to what comes next. So this is a picture of the dashboard in its current form, although as I said, it's totally being redone, but the way that it's existed for the last few years is in this table format. And so this is just one particular screen from the dashboard. You can see this screen is showing GPA of 2.0 or higher, GPA of 3.0 or higher, and then some of the persistence metrics about whether they completed 30 or more units. And this, I realized I pulled this for the most recent year, and so it's not showing the 3 consecutive terms, but if you pull data from say 2016, 2017, it'll show the percentage of foster youth who have completed 3 consecutive terms, and then there's the course completion rate. So this is just kind of an example of what the data looks like now. Now when we revamp it, when they revamp it, it's going to look very different. It's not going to be in a table format like this. It's going to actually be much more visual. And so charts and graphs and things showing the data. So one of the questions that comes up often is, how are foster youth identified? How are they defined for the purposes of this system? And currently, for the most part, this is populated through student self-report on the admissions application. So this is one of the bigger kind of flaws, I would say, in the data system, is that in a perfect world, we would have a data match with our Department of Social Services, where we would be able to actually be looking at foster youth who were verified. We don't have that set up yet, and so there is a question on the application that says, were you ever in the foster care system? And if they check yes to that question, then that's how they're identified as a foster youth. Some campuses are supplementing that with other sources, such as pulling data from the FAFSA, from their Chafee ETV grant roster, but we haven't been able to necessarily get all the campuses to use those additional methods. And so there is some variation. We have 114 community colleges here in California, so there's quite a lot of campuses. But for the most part, these are not verified foster youth. These are just based on self-report. We've done a little bit of research where we were able to compare, we were able to look at students from one particularly large school district who were verified as foster youth in high school, who went on to community college, and found that at least probably 25% of those students who enrolled in community college did not identify themselves on the application as foster youth. So we know that there's some under-identification going on with this, but we are working to develop better ways to be able to flag who the foster youth are. So in terms of what it took to get us to the point where we have this data system, even with its various imperfections, it has really allowed us to access a tremendous amount of information about the foster youth population, and really has enabled us to, I think most importantly, move our policy agenda forward. We've used the data that has come out of this work to really enact a number of pieces of legislation that I think are really significant for foster youth attending college. And so it's been just an incredibly valuable tool for us. So the first thing it took was collaborating with the public systems to identify foster youth. So getting that question on the community college application that says, were you ever in the foster care system, was really the linchpin to everything, because the rest of the data already existed. The colleges have the data about whether students passed their classes, whether they got financial aid, if they stayed enrolled in school, what their course taking patterns were. That all existed in the college data system. What didn't exist was being able to pull out that data specifically for foster youth. And so creating that checkbox really was the piece that moved all of this work forward. Once that was in there, then we could mix and match and look at whatever configurations of data that we wanted to specifically for foster youth. In addition, having the CalPAS Plus system made a huge difference, and having funding for ERP to create the foster youth data dashboard was key, and that never would have happened if there hadn't been funding for them to do that. So fortunately, we had some philanthropic partners here in California who were very interested in this work, who did provide funding to create that dashboard, and they've continued to provide funding to do upgrades and to do a lot of the research work that has come out of that as well. So funding was key. When this effort first started, we had a large stakeholder engagement process where we brought together different folks to really hash out what were the indicators that we wanted to include in the dashboard. And so all of those indicators that you saw on the previous slide were things that came out of quite extensive discussion. Now, I will say that when the new dashboard launches in a couple of months, some of those indicators are going to be the same and some are going to be different. The changes to them did not come from the same kind of widespread stakeholder engagement process, but rather our community college system is doing a tremendous amount of work on its own around data and what kind of data to make available both publicly and to campuses. And so a lot of the data indicators on the foster youth data dashboard are going to be aligned with some of the broader data efforts that are happening in the community colleges, and it will allow us to compare apples to apples a little bit better. The next piece that was really crucial was partnering with a backbone organization. That was my organization, John Burton Advocates for Youth, really bringing content knowledge to the research. So we have worked hand in hand with ERP through every step of this process, and they come with the knowledge about how to build data dashboards and how to do research. And we came with the knowledge about the foster youth population and some of the specific needs that foster youth face in college and the resources that are available to them, and really understanding what kind of data would be most important to us in doing our policy work. And so having that partnership has really been essential. Neither one of our organizations could have done this alone. And so it really took both of us. Engaging stakeholders to ensure data quality. When we first developed the dashboard, we did a number of groups where we brought together different folks from a particular campus, sat down with them, and looked at the data from their campus and said, here's what it's saying. Does any of this seem totally off base to you? And just doing sort of a reality check. And that was useful for us to then go back to ERP and say, okay, this data point seems really off. Can you take a look at it? And in some cases, the answer was, no, it's right. That is what it is. And that's a surprising finding and good information to have. And in other cases, they looked at it and said, oh, actually, there's a formula wrong here. We need to tweak something. You're right. That data point is incorrect. And so that was important to really sort of get to a point where people felt like they had a level of confidence in the data. We've also had a couple of different research partners that we've brought in to produce reports analyzing the data, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then the advocacy partner, which in our case is the same as the backbone organization, which is my organization, which has really taken the research and strategized around how to translate that into concrete policy ideas. So we have a couple of different publications we've done that I'll just mention, and these are both on our website. The first one, Charting the Course in 2015. This was a descriptive research project that laid out both at community colleges and the 4 universities how are foster youth faring relative to non-foster youth. And then a couple of years ago, we had another report called Accelerating Success. And this looked at milestones and momentum points that are predictive of foster youth success. So essentially, they looked at a number of things and saw what correlated to foster youth doing better in college, and found things like if a foster youth took a math and English course, took both a math and an English course in their first year, they're more likely to complete than if they don't. And so it looked at a bunch of different things. It found also that, for example, not surprisingly, students who had moved around more in high school, had more high schools, were less likely to be successful in college. So not a surprising finding, but a very useful one to be able to inform our policy work and, have the data that kind of supports what might seem intuitive. So Accelerating Success looked at a bunch of those things, also looked at colleges in California that had better than expected outcomes for foster youth. And they did some qualitative research, doing some interviews with those campuses to try to understand what was going on at those campuses and what were some of the practices that might be contributing to the fact that those outcomes were better. We have a couple of research works in progress. The first, I talked a little bit about the CalYouth study earlier. We're going to be doing some data matching between the CalYouth study and what is in CalPAS. And so what this will allow us to do is look at things about how the child welfare experience is impacting college success. So placement type and length of time in care and age that somebody entered care, and those kind of factors that the CalYouth study has available to it. What does that tell us then about what happens to those students as they transition into college? So that's due out sometime in the spring of 2020. And then we have another project that's linking the college data to our K-12 data, which is building on our existing data matching between K-12 and our child welfare system. So essentially what that means is that our K-12 system does a data match with our Department of Social Services, CDSS. So that system knows who the foster youth are. It's not based on self-report. It's actually validated data about who the foster youth are, unlike what we have in CalPAS currently for the colleges. So by linking the college data to the K-12 data, we can look at some of these same indicators for not sort of that big, huge, anybody who self-identifies as a foster youth population, but actually look at outcomes for students who were in foster care later, who were in foster care in their senior year of high school. And then, as I mentioned before, we are revamping the dashboard. So we're going to have a lot more information available on that in the next couple of months. Now, the one thing I should say, unfortunately, about the data dashboard is that it's not a public system. And so it's only available to participating campuses and other partners. And so if you are interested in seeing what's available publicly, there is some information in the broader community college dashboard system called the Data Mart. It's not a ton of information, but they have a few indicators that are on there specifically for foster youth. And if anybody wants to know more about that, you can certainly reach out to me and I can tell you more. My contact information will be on the last slide. So future research goals, this is our kind of wish list. So as I said, we're doing this one-time data matching between the K-12 and college data for the purposes of this research report. We'd love to create an ongoing data linkage between those two systems. Right now, not every single K-12 district participates in CalPAS Plus, and not all of our 4 universities do. So we have really robust data for the community colleges, not as much for the K-12, and pretty limited for the universities. So that's something we're trying to get more of. Eventually, this is a very long-term goal, would be data systems that actually provide the capacity to share personally identifiable information to help colleges conduct outreach and such to foster youth. So moving beyond just the aggregated data, evaluating our campus support programs. We really don't have a quantitative evaluation of the campus support programs for foster youth to help us identify which programs are most effective. And so that's something we aspire to do. And then here in California, just this past year, there was a bill passed to create a longitudinal educational data system that's going to look all the way from pre-K through K-12, community college, universities, and workforce outcomes. And we are doing some advocacy work to try to make sure that foster youth are identified as a special subpopulation within that, so that once that system is created, which is a ways down the line, but that would be a resource for us to get more information about the foster youth population. So I'm going to transition now to our policy efforts and how the research work that we've done has informed the policy work that we've done. So we've been pretty successful here in California in our policy efforts. We are now at $32.3 million annually that we've leveraged from the state. So that amount is $83 million total and growing. That includes something called our Next Up program, which I'm going to talk a lot more about in a minute, as well as some expansions for our financial aid programs, in particular for the Chafee ETV program, which folks are probably aware is a federal program that has a state match, and our state now overmatches the federal allocation by $7 million. So we have $7 million additional state funding that's not required in that program. And then we have a financial aid program here in California called the Cal Grant, which essentially offers a tuition waiver for low-income students. And we were able to get some funding to expand that to make it more available to the foster youth population specifically. And so in terms of how this really kind of works here, we think of it as this continuous feedback loop. And so there's private investment that has come in. So these are foundation supporters that fund JBay to do implementation support. So this is our technical assistance and training. And a big part of our work is working with the college campuses very directly, as well as our K-12 systems and our child welfare systems, about how they can refine their programs, make them more effective, and implement the various legislation that's available. As we do that work, we get a lot of feedback from the field about what's working and what's not working, and the policy ideas that they have. And that's extremely valuable to us. So rather than just trying to come up with ideas on our own, the TA work and the training work that we do really puts us in contact with a lot of practitioners who can give us feedback about what needs to change. That then informs the research work that we do to try to figure out what kind of data do we need to be able to make the case for whatever change it is that people are wanting to see, and that then informs our policy efforts. And then once we are able to get a new policy enacted, we get more private investment to do implementation support. And so we'll go out there and work with campuses to figure out how to best implement whatever law was just put into place. And that kind of starts the cycle all over again. And this has been a really effective kind of mechanism for us, this continuous feedback loop that really requires all of these different pieces to move our agenda forward. So the example I'm going to share is our Next Up program, which was implemented by a bill called Senate Bill 1023. And what this program does is it exists at 45 of our community colleges, and it's a targeted foster youth support program that's 100% funded by the state. So there's a $20 million budget allocation annually to fund the program. It's currently limited to students who are under age 26 in foster care after age 16 and enrolled in at least 9 units. Well, I will say that some data that's been coming out recently, not here specifically in California, but nationally, has prompted us to most likely pursue lowering the eligibility criteria so that a student will need to be in foster care after the age of 13 rather than 16. So that's something we're going to be trying to do in 2020. And The program provides counseling and case management. It provides a fair bit of financial support, so actually buying books and bus passes and gas cards and things. Provides academic counseling and tutoring, seminars and workshops, and linkages to resources. So I think pretty typical of a campus-based foster youth support program. How this came about is we had a lot of programs here in California, often referred to as Guardian Scholars programs, that were funded almost entirely through private investment, through foundation funders. And that really helped develop the model and created a kind of a structure and something we could say, okay, here's something that's been in place for 10 years now. It seems to work. You know, there was some limited research done that really was able to demonstrate certainly the need for targeted support. Again, all that data I showed in the beginning showing how foster youth outcomes are not as good as other students helped to make the case. And then we did the bill, SB 1023, which created the program. When it was originally created, it was at 29 colleges with a $15 million budget allocation. We then got funding to create a learning community. So we worked with those 29 colleges for 2 years to help them implement their programs and figure out the kinks. And that then allowed us to do another bill a couple of years later to expand to, it says 41 there, that's actually not right, it's 45, with an annual budget of $20 million. And so the goal someday is to make this available at all or most of the colleges, the community colleges in California. So we're getting there. I just wanted to kind of quickly run through some of the other policies we have here in California in case these might be useful models or something you would want to pursue in other parts of the country. We have some priority housing legislation that gives foster youth priority access to on-campus housing, as well as priority access to any housing that's available year-round. And then more recently, about 4 years ago, there was a bill enacted that allows foster youth to stay in on-campus housing during academic breaks at no charge. Now, this does not include summer, but it does include things like spring break and winter break if there's not a winter term. We've also done some work around priority registration, and this is such a huge benefit here in California. Our colleges are very impacted, and some of the classes that are most crucial can be very challenging to get, especially if a student needs to work full-time and fit their class schedule around that. So priority registration gives them first crack at enrolling in their courses, which makes a huge difference. And we did update that in 2016. There was originally a sunset clause that got removed, and we were able to expand the eligible population a bit for who qualifies for that. We've also done a lot of work around reducing the burden of verification. And this I think has been, it's not as glamorous, and so it doesn't get as much attention, but I think it's so important. So here in California, we have a county-based child welfare system. Every county operates independently. And so for a long time, before 2015, if a student needed to get verification that they were in foster care for financial aid eligibility or priority registration, they'd have to go to their county and track that down, and it was very confusing. And you know, if you're 22 years old and you left foster care when you were 16, it was a big barrier for foster youth. So the first thing that we did was, we have an ombudsman's office here in California, and we did a bill that gave them permission to provide foster youth verification for anybody who'd been in foster care in California across the state. So now people can just call one simple toll-free number and get access to that verification, regardless of whether they were in Los Angeles or San Francisco or Mono County. Another bill that we just did in 2017 that actually just went into place a few months ago was, we now have automated FAFSA verification. And so if a student indicates that they were in foster care on their FAFSA to get independent status, there is now an automatic data match that happens between our Student Aid Commission and our Department of Social Services to verify, yes, that student was in foster care after the age of 13, and then they don't have to bring in anything. It's not perfect, but you know, there's some students that slip through the cracks and have to bring in verification anyway, but I'd say for probably 80 to 90% of them, they're able to just be automatically verified and they don't have to even worry about that piece. Case planning. We've started to do some work around starting earlier. How do we help ensure that foster youth are set up for success when they arrive at college? So we've actually done a lot more work over the last couple of years with our K-12 system and really trying to inject college planning into part of the mandate of those staff who are tasked with supporting foster youth. And then again, another pretty recent bill we just did, we did a bill that mandates that social workers must now identify in the case plan who will be supporting that youth if they're 16 years or older with college applications and financial aid applications. There's a lot we have to do around implementation of that, and so we're going to be doing a learning community next year, bringing together some of the child welfare agencies to really figure out how to make that a real thing. Chafee grant expansion, I already talked about that. We got some additional funding, and we also expanded age eligibility based on the new expansion at the federal level. And so we now have eligibility up to age 26. Cal Grant expansion, again, this is a very California specific thing, but really sort of allowed us to create essentially a tuition waiver for foster youth at our universities. We don't call it a tuition waiver, we call it the Cal Grant, but that's what the Cal Grant does, is it pays full tuition at one of our Cal State or University of California campuses. And then this is kind of not a policy thing, but I just wanted to mention it. We've done something over the past 2 years called the Foster Youth FAFSA Challenge. So we worked with our county offices of education, who all have foster youth services programs, to do a contest to see who could get the most FAFSAs completed for their high school seniors in foster care. We here in California have a data system called Web Grants, which actually allows anybody in the K-12 system to look up and see who's done a FAFSA and who hasn't. So it's based on real information. It's not just like somebody said they did a FAFSA. You know, you can really see in there, yes, the FAFSA was done and it was done correctly, or no, it wasn't, or it was done, but there were errors. You can see all of that. The first year we did it, we had 45% of high school seniors in foster care complete a FAFSA, and then this past year that went up to 58%. So we're really excited about that, and we're going to be doing it again for 1920. Some other stuff that we're working on this year, improving distribution of our Chafee ETV grants, modifying satisfactory academic progress requirements. We have found that about half of students at community colleges who receive a Chafee ETV grant lose it after the first year because they don't make satisfactory academic progress. So we're trying to create some more flexibility in that. And then addressing student homelessness. This is not specific to foster youth, but a lot of foster youth are going to benefit from it. We were successful in getting $19 million this year in the state budget across all three of our public college and university systems to develop something called college-focused rapid rehousing programs, which are permanent housing programs to address student homelessness. And then some of our longer-term future policy goals. We want to start bringing caregivers more into the mix. We developed a caregiver training about post-secondary education that we were able to implement in Los Angeles County, which has the largest foster youth population in the state. And so now all caregivers in LA County who have a youth in their care who is in middle school or high school are mandated to do training on post-secondary education. And so we want to expand that beyond Los Angeles to the rest of the state. We want to continue to expand the role of child welfare agencies in post-secondary planning, really have that be more squarely a part of their responsibility. Summer housing and homelessness are just such a huge issue here in California, not just for foster youth, for a lot of folks, but for foster youth in particular. And we really need to start figuring out how to address homelessness if we want these young people to be successful. And then expanding the kind of support we're able to offer. We don't have any state funding currently going to the universities, although they all have programs now, but they are kind of funded by the individual campus and or privately funded. There's no central state budget allocation to support those programs, so that's something we'd like to do. And then, as I mentioned before, aligning eligibility for the Next Step program to the Pell Grant so that a youth can be in care after 13 instead of 16 to access that. So that's my presentation. Here is my contact information as well as the JBay website and the California College Pathways website. Happy to answer any questions now, or feel free to reach out to me later if there's other information that you'd like.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Debbie. That was great information. I appreciate you doing that. So I'm going to open it up now for our Q&A time. So if you could go ahead and type in any questions that you have for Debbie into the chat box, I'll read those out. And again, if you're calling in by phone and you don't have the chat box availability, please email me your questions at amy.salazar, SALAZAR, at wsu.edu. So I'll give you a second to type in your questions. Okay, so the first question is, what are some examples of ways that colleges are putting the data to use from the dashboard?
Yeah, so I realize I should have mentioned this. There's actually another kind of piece of functionality on the dashboard that I forgot to mention, which is something we call the cohort tool. And that actually allows a campus to upload a list of students who participate in their program and get data specifically for that sublist. And so I know that there's a few campuses that have done that. And I think, what it's helped them to see is really sort of understanding where they need to target their efforts. So for example, one program that we worked with found that, they were doing a really good job getting students financial aid access. So 90% of their students had a Pell Grant in place. So they kind of knew like, okay, whatever we're doing to make sure they're getting connected to financial aid is working, let's keep that up. But they also saw that the term-to-term retention was probably the most troubling data point. Just, a lot of really high rates of students not successfully coming back after the spring and, re-enrolling in the fall after that first year. And so I think, that kind of information prompted them to really start thinking about, what can we do over the summer? What can, how do we stay engaged with these students so that they come back? And so those are kind of the kinds of information I think that colleges have been able to use the data to help inform their work.
Okay, great, thanks. So another question is, have other states or colleges in other states expressed interest in using your data collection tools, and is that an option?
I have not had communication with other states, but I know that ERP, who manages CalPass Plus, does work in other states. They're not only in California. And so I imagine that they would certainly be open to having those conversations. I don't know off the top of my head what states they're already in and which ones they're not. But if whoever asked that question wants to send me an email, I'm happy to make a direct connection to my contact at ERP to talk about how that might be possible.
Okay. So the next question is, let's see, when social workers identify who will help students with their college applications, who are the most common types of people that they list?
That's a really good question. I don't have an answer to that question, unfortunately, because that's not something that we can pull data on. So they have to name somebody in the case plan, but that information lives in the child welfare data system, which is not a system that we have access to. And it's a really new requirement. So we just got funding to do a learning community for this in 2020 to start kind of honing in to see. To be perfectly honest, I think that the requirement probably hasn't been implemented as robustly as we would like, which is a big part of the reason why we're doing the learning community, to make the law not just something that's written down on a piece of paper, but that's something real. So it'll be very interesting once we get into that work to really understand better who it is that is being identified. So stay tuned about that.
Okay. So I haven't had any additional questions come in. So I think we might be at the end of our webinar today. So thank you so much again, Debbie, for presenting. If people, so we will be making this webinar available on the NRC FAHE website. Both the PowerPoint and the recording will be posted soon. So please be sure to join us for our future webinars. Thanks, everyone. And thank you, Debbie.
Thank you.
Bye.